Yes, sir. Yes, ma'am. Penn State fans, we are back. Bob Flounders, Johnny McGonigal. It's a Monday. It's Illinois Monday for James Franklin's Penn State program. Johnny and I are here to bring the energy. It's a big week, Johnny. It really is. We just heard from James. Penn State's 3-0. Illinois is 4-0. I did not necessarily see this coming as a Penn State big game, but Illinois has earned it, man. They've won some big games already. They won at Nebraska. This is going to be a test, I think, a real test, regardless of the point spread, for James Franklin and his 3-0 Nittany Lions.
Bob, you said that we're bringing the energy. We're not bringing the whiteout energy that James Franklin asked for after the Kent State game. I think he subliminally brought his own whiteout energy to his Monday press conference by wearing that white Penn State hoodie. You've got on, for the listeners, not the watchers, you've got on a gray Cowboys shirt. I've got on a blue hoodie and a blue hat. So not quite the whiteout energy from us, but energy nonetheless.
It will be energetic.
It will be energetic. Absolutely. I mean, when you're wearing a bright red Buc-ee's visor, Bob, like the energy just kind of emanates, just kind of screams off you to begin with. So, regardless of what you say, you're already bringing the energy right from the jump.
Thanks, man. I appreciate that. I appreciate the Buc-ee's visor. I think Greg Pickle's wife, Maddie, got me this after she went to a Buc-ee's. I think they were in the Carolinas. I think you've been to a Buc-ee's. I've heard from Penn State fans who are Buc-ee's fans. I have not been there. I'm pumped, Johnny. On a side note, Wawa is now in the Harrisburg area. There's one by the airport in Middletown. There's one coming in my direction. You want to talk about energetic? There's one going to come in right in my neighborhood by the city in the next couple of months. I know Joe Hermit, who is a super Wawa fan, is excited about this. But let's narrow our focus. I'm all excited thinking about Wawa and Buc-ee's now. I'm totally off the rails. Johnny, this is a big game. It really is. You can always tell when it's a big game based upon what James Franklin has to say on his either Monday or Tuesday presser, because he loves to talk about the other team, and he should, but he doesn't give up. He doesn't give up a lot on his end. I think he's a little tight. I don't blame him. I think this is a really good coaching matchup. I don't think, Johnny, and I'm not trying to get into the preview, but they did play last year. These two teams played last year in Champaign. You were out there with me. Penn State fans, if you ever have an opportunity to go to a Penn State game against Illinois in Champaign, listen to me very carefully. Pass it up. Save your money and go to another game where there's a better locale, because you're not missing nothing in Champaign. You get in, you get out. Penn State did just that last year, winning 30-13. They made Luke Altmyer, who's Illinois' quarterback, look a little foolish. He threw 4 interceptions. I don't think he's that guy anymore. He looked really, really good against Nebraska in Nebraska. James Franklin referenced that. That's why I bring this up to the Penn State fans. He referenced it right off the top at his Monday presser, Johnny. 10 interceptions, 10 touchdowns, 0 interceptions for Luke. He threw 4 touchdowns against Nebraska. They needed all those points. I think if he is as good as he looked against Nebraska, Penn State's defense better be ready.
Definitely. No, it was a different quarterback watching that Friday night game against Nebraska last week. Luke Altmyer, he was sharp. He was quick with the ball coming out of his hands, which I think is a difference. He was holding on to the ball a little bit more last year, especially in that Penn State game. Slower to get through his reads. I mean, he was quick with it. On the road in a raucous environment, in Nebraska at Memorial Stadium. So, I would expect, the game plan to be similar against Penn State secondary, which we already know is missing a massive piece in that secondary, J.J. Winston at safety. And so you're going to see Jalen Reed, Zaki Wheatley at safety. You're going to see a rotation of corners, A.J. Harris, Jalen Kimber. Elliot Washington got a start last week against Kent State.
Yeah.
And James mentioned that was kind of twofold, where, Elliot had earned it, but also A.J. Harris was dealing with a little bit of a stomach bug or stomach flu prior to the game. So that might have played into it as well. But this secondary is going to be tested. This Penn State secondary is going to be tested, I think, definitely more than last week against Kent State. You mentioned how much James talks about the opponent in his kind of a pre-press conference, like his
Yeah.
preamble, his intro to the presser. Normally he recaps the previous game as well, and he didn't really even do that. Like, yeah, we already kind of know what happened with the Kent
He
State game.
scared us.
Yeah, spared us the 5 minutes of rehashing that massive expected win over Kent State. But we look at and saw what Penn State's defense struggled in. Shots down the field against Bowling Green, and I think in terms of corrections, in terms of an improved defense, Kent State was never going to really test that, especially when their quarterbacks went out of the game so early. But they will be tested, I think, this weekend against Luke Altmyer and a couple of really good receivers, a transfer in Franklin from UTSA originally, and Bryant as well, a guy who was really productive for them last year. So this will be, I think, the first real known test going in for this secondary and this defense.
I agree, Johnny. Pat Bryant, I think, is the Illinois receiver. He had a big game. He's had a lot of big games already this year. He caused a lot of problems. Nebraska's defense isn't bad, but they had. I watched a lot of that game. Illinois had them on the ropes throughout the game. I mean, it was a toss-up game, but for Illinois to go into that environment, it was a sellout crowd. They had to come back, right? They had to come back in the second half. They took over. They took over as the game went on. They were able to run the ball. They got pressure on Nebraska's quarterback, Raiola, the freshman. The last possession, I think, was just a sackathon. But I mean, they were fresh at the finish. I think this is a pretty good team. I don't think this is. I think the record says what they really are. I think they are one of the better teams in an expanded Big Ten. They did beat Kansas, Andy Kolodnicki's old team at home. They're not quite as good, but I take a lot away from winning in Lincoln. I think Brett Bielema. Remember when Dave Jones always used to give me grief because I never pronounced his name correctly? I still don't know if I'm doing it right. I think he knows how to coach. He did a number on Penn State in 2021 with a team that I think was scrappy, but not nearly as talented as this one. They didn't have a quarterback like this guy. They had a running game. But this is going to be a test. I got to say, we're going to get back to James Franklin's press conference because he did have some interesting things to say about his wideouts and, like you said, the test that awaits his secondary. But can we just talk for a couple seconds about this point spread? I am really at a loss. I'm sure it hasn't moved. I saw it's 17.5. It's a struggle for me to think that the number is that big. And that, that suggests to me that it's not a mismatch, but it's close. I'm having a hard time trying to process this point spread and where it's gonna head. I know Penn State fans like to bet Penn State. I know that it's a big fan base, but to me, I think I was way wrong. I thought it would be 10 or 11, but 17.5. I just can't believe it, Johnny.
Yeah, I was smiling / smirking a little bit when you dropped that little nugget about the line because we talked about this in the press box on Saturday. When the game got out of hand against Kent State, and it got out of hand maybe not as quick as some people thought it would.
Right.
The Pabula interception there, I think, stunted that a bit, but it eventually got out of hand, and we started talking about the next week and everything. And we were trying to guess the opening line, and you said 10.5. I think I said 13.5.
Yeah.
And I guess full marks and credit go to John Sauber.
John Sauber was he smelt it out, man. Kudos. Smelt it out
because he said 16.5. So last I checked, it was still 17.5.
Yeah.
I was a little surprised it was that high. I'm not surprised that they're at least a 2-touchdown favorite, just because I think that there is still a talent gap we're talking about here. Like Illinois has had a really nice start to the season. They got up to, I think, 9 or 10 points that they were dogs at Nebraska, and obviously won that game. So credit to them for that. And they have the road experience, which James Franklin mentioned in his press conference. But I do think that as much as Illinois has had a really good start to the season, I do still think there's a pretty noticeable, significant talent gap along the lines of scrimmage, and certainly, at running back, Penn State has an advantage there. I think even though Altmyer has played well so far this season, I think Aller is a better quarterback. And so you look at the big positions, you look at the big, matchups there. I still think Penn State is. I think Penn State's going to win this game, but I wouldn't be surprised if it's closer than 17.
Yeah, I mean, and I'm just gonna. Penn State fans, if you're listening, look, I am by no means a great bettor. I will bet. I lose a lot, but if you're gonna lay 17 and a half, Penn State fans, this is what I'm telling to you. It's gonna be a night game. You're gonna be feeling good. If you lay those points and it's 17 and a half, and Johnny, you can speak to this. That means if they're up 24 points in the fourth quarter, you're going to be feeling good, but you're also going to be sweating out the backdoor cover. To me, I'm trying to envision a game in which Penn State's up like they were last year, really in the fourth quarter, and I just am not sure. I say that for a couple reasons. Number one, no Kevin Winston. I think that's significant. I also think that you mentioned Penn State's running game. Illinois, they did a nice job on the Nebraska running game, which is not a bad running game. They have not allowed a rushing touchdown this year. Opponents are running for 3.5 yards a clip. I know they haven't seen an offensive coordinator like Andy Kotelnicki, who carved them up last year, with the Kansas offense. And that's significant, right? But with the firepower he has, with the two running backs, with Drew, with a tight end that's just the way that they move Tyler Warren around, and with an emerging deep threat in Omari Evans. That's the guy that I think James always says to us, Johnny, hey, you guys aren't really talking enough about this guy or that guy. To me, I'm surprised we didn't get blasted by that, because I think if there's a guy since the start of the season that probably needs to be talked about a little more, it's Omari, because he's always had the speed, but now he looks like more of a football player with speed. And I don't think it's a question of the competition. He said he can run by just about everyone. Zane Durant told me he's easily one of the 3 fastest players on the team. That to me is the guy that I think Brett Bielema is going to be worried about.
Yeah, and I think on a larger scale, we can talk about the wide receivers, because Amari is obviously a big part of that group, and the improvements that group has made and shown, really from the preseason question mark, the group that we talk so much about and wrote so much about, and through 3 games, I think that Amari's been a big part of it, but they've proven as a group, at least game by game, that they have some guys in that group that have played well. And it started with Harrison Wallace, started with Trey at the West Virginia game, 2 touchdowns, 117 yards. Omari Evans has had at least 1 catch of 25 yards now in his last 5 games, dating back to last season. He's emerged as a dependable downfield threat. And like you said, Bob, he's not just like a track star anymore. He's a football player. And I think that there was a noted difference from the time that he came in at Penn State to now, the way that he's developed and grown, on the practice field. And now we're seeing it on game days. Liam Clifford, breaks open a little bit there against Kent State, gets into the end zone for his first career touchdown, had a 38-yard catch as well. Julian Fleming with a 39-yard catch. So just getting, those two, their confidence up a little bit before Big Ten play starts. James Franklin said that this secondary is going to be a challenge, and not just for the wide receivers, who they're going to be going up against some serious man coverage that Illinois will want to impose upon them. So it's going to be on them to create separation, and on Andy Kotelnicki to generate open receivers, but also on Drew Aller, because this Illinois secondary, they've got 7 interceptions already through 4 games, tied for the most in the Big Ten. You mentioned Jalen Daniels from Kansas. They picked him off 3 times. They picked off Dylan Raiola last Friday. So Drew's going to have to stay clean and obviously go through his progressions, and the offensive line is going to have to hold up. The running game is going to have to help. It's going to have to be a group effort. But that's really what I'm looking forward to watching, is how Drew performs under the lights, at Beaver Stadium against a secondary that I think is going to be really his first test of the year, because West Virginia secondary is not it. Bowling Green, they were thrown open guys pretty much all game. The offense had to carry him to that win, and Kent State was never going to trouble him.
Yeah. Also, Bowling Green gave Texas A&M all it wanted on Saturday down there. That tight end wrecked the A&M defense too. He's a good player. Not a complete tight end, but he does one thing really well. And at 6'3", 230, he can run, he can get open. Harold Fannin, that was, I think, a 6-point game. James actually mentioned that. Well, here's one for you, Johnny, before I ask you about something James said. Do you think our bosses at PennLive and Tyler Warren would be mad if I started referring to Tyler in print on PennLive as Tyler Witten because he reminds me so much of Jason Witten. Is that uncalled for? Is that crossing the line? Or do you think it's like a nice compliment for Tyler and I should be allowed to do it?
I think you should be allowed to do it if you want to. I mean, after Sunday's game, I'll compare him to Dallas Goedert.
How about that? Yeah.
Yeah. I mean,
But Witten and Warren, that's what I'm going with. It kind of flows.
Yeah. It flows a hell of a lot better. And jokes aside, though, Tyler Warren has been as advertised, through 3 weeks. I mean, 2 weeks ago against Bowling Green, he set a program record, single game record in yards for a tight end for Penn State. And then we saw what he did against Kent State, catching a touchdown, 50 yards in the first half, could have had another 50, 60, 70 in the second half if they wanted to play him. Had a passing touchdown. He's a lefty. I didn't know he was a lefty, but he's a lefty, a former high school quarterback. So he's as versatile as they come, as good as they come in terms of tight ends in college football. James Franklin made that clear in his post-game press conference, saying point blank, Tyler Warren is the best tight end in the country. And so Mackey Award voters, I think, have been put on notice through a few games for Tyler Warren if they weren't already aware of him. But Tyler Witten, look, I'm good with it, but I'm not your boss. So
I know. You kind of are. But anyway, you know what? If you're going to judge Tyler Warren or Tyler Witten on his all-around game, I think you absolutely should. Just don't look at the highlight of his touchdown pass, because that, I don't want to say that was a duck, because it didn't quack. It didn't quack, Johnny, but it was not a pretty throw. Hopefully they're done ribbing him on the practice field, but that pass, man, that was something. Johnny, let's move along here on Blue White Breakdown as we continue to bring that whiteout energy on a Monday. Hey, so there were a couple injuries for Penn State in the game. One, I think, obviously more meaningful than the other, but both, hopefully, both are not significant. The young running back, Cam Wallace, late in the game, he had already run for 39 yards and a touchdown on 9 carries. He had to be helped off the field. That looked like a pretty significant leg or knee injury. That was one. But also, I think maybe we should talk about this one. Dom DeLuca left the game at some point in the first half and did not return. When they go to a three linebacker look, Dom's usually the guy on the field. He's also a special teams captain, a guy that the coaching staff values for all the things he does for that team. James did not have an update on either Dom or Cam. Of the two, I mean, again, I'm not going to speculate, but if I had to guess, Cam Wallace looks like that could be a long-term one. But if they don't have somebody like Dom DeLuca against Illinois, I think that's fairly significant, because they're already without Winston, right? And that kind of impacts how they want to go with the 4-2-5 with the Lion. And, if they want to play 3 linebackers, it probably should be DeLuca if they're at their best. So I think that is a significant injury, Johnny.
Yeah, I would agree, Bob. It's one that obviously, like you mentioned, we don't know the extent, so not going to speculate, on that. But at the very least, if he's missing this game, that's a piece of the defense that you'd like to have against Illinois, because we've talked about the receivers and Altmyer and everything else. But this is still, with Bert Bielema, with Brett, Big Bert, he still wants to run the ball. He still wants to run the ball. And so when you go 3 linebackers, if you go to a 4-3, you'd love to have DeLuca on the field. If he's not on the field, maybe it's more of Tamir Robinson, maybe it's more Elston. And alongside Tony Rojas and Kobe King. And we saw Kobe King take a shot too, that was reviewed, I think, for targeting. He got laid out by that offensive lineman as he was going for the interception in the first quarter against Kent State. So, and the linebacker room is already, I don't want to say thin, but, maybe it's Abdul Carter bumping back, to linebacker if they're going 3 linebacker looks and you rely on a mean Vanover and Denida Sutton off the edge. Who knows? It's going to be an interesting one to keep an eye on. We'll be keeping close tabs. I know Max will be at practice on Wednesday. We'll see if there's any developments there on Wednesday night before the game on Saturday, but definitely something to keep in mind.
And, Penn State fans, most Penn State fans remember that 2021 game, the 9 overtime game, the 2018 game. And I'm just bringing that up because in that game, you mentioned Illinois' head coach. He knows what he's doing. He is he's literally a larger than life figure, and I'm just going to leave it at that, Johnny. But in that game, where I swear, I think they ran for over 400 yards in that game. Honestly, it was close. Chase Brown set, I think, the Beaver Stadium record for an opposing runner, and that still stands here, like I think 250 plus. But in that game, they didn't have a good offense. But Brett, he had an alignment where they had a quarterback, a running back, and everyone else was at the line of scrimmage. So it was like literally 7 offensive line. No, yes. I'm trying to do my math here. That was 9 guys. Yeah, 7 offensive linemen, 2 tight ends, a quarterback, and a running back. And he said, try and stop us. And Penn State could not. And that wasn't a bad defense. There were some NFL players on that defense. And if so, what I'm saying is, if he thinks he's got Penn State over the barrel at the linebacker position, even as well as they can throw the ball, he's going to do whatever he can to try and create a matchup advantage. And I do think if they don't have DeLuca on top of not having Kevin Winston, there are going to be some times where Penn State might get caught in a bind. And see where I'm going here, Johnny. And that'll be interesting for Tom Allen, who's also adjusting to a new spot on game day. I think he's going to be back up in the coaching booth again for this one. He's certainly used to being on the sideline. And I don't know, Johnny, reading between the lines, I think he's having a hard time adjusting to being up in the booth. But I think that's where James wants him.
Yeah, Tom Allen, after coming over, obviously as the Indiana head coach, he was on the field for the first 2 games of the season, up in the booth against Kent State. And James Franklin has said time and time again, and not just with Tom Allen, but in past years, that he believes for a coordinator, for a play caller, whether it's offensive or defense, that being up in the booth is, most beneficial, where you get the best, obviously, vantage point, and where you can call the best game. And so I wouldn't be surprised to see Tom Allen back up in the booth. I feel for whoever is with him in terms of analysts, in terms of keeping him sane, because he is a super energetic guy, and wouldn't be surprised if there's some holes smoked in the walls if Luke Altmyer throws for a touchdown or 2. We'll see. You mentioned, and we've talked about KJ Winston, and it is a big loss. I do want to harp on the fact, though, that I do think Jalen Reed has had a really good start to the season.
Yeah.
Like, really good start to the season. It started out at West Virginia, bad out of hell there, making plays left and right. And he is, still one of the best safeties in the Big Ten. And so as long as, he's playing and, hitting on all cylinders, and you've got Zaki next to him, Dejon Lane, the true freshman, might get some more run if they want to put Jalen at that line position. If not, it could come down to Cam Miller at the line position. We'll see how they ultimately decide to configure and reconfigure that defense. We saw a lot of guys going in and out in the Kent State game. It was kind of hard to get a grip on who exactly they're settled on, if they're settled on anyone in a certain setup in that 4-2-5. I think this Illinois game is going to tell us a little bit more, a lot more, frankly, than the Kent State game did about what this defense is going to look like post KJ Winston.
Yeah. And let's just wrap up with this. Again, we're going to be back with at least one more podcast later in the week to preview the game, give our predictions. But Johnny, just hearing the way James talked, guarded, right? The whiteout energy. I think he knows of the challenge that awaits him, and that this is a serious Illinois team. It really feels to me this is one of those games of the Franklin era. And it's now in its 11th year. Johnny, it feels to me like the coordinators on both sides, and especially, Brett, I think, has his hands in a lot with the run game at Illinois and also the defense. He's got a coordinator on both sides. It just feels to me that the coaching in this game, the strategy in this game, the game planning, the chess pieces and the alignments, I think it's going to be a bigger deal than most Penn State games. It feels that way to me. And if at some point one side could sense a weakness in the other side, that could be a huge difference in determining the outcome.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. And one, specific part to that and piece to that, and something that you mentioned earlier in the podcast, Bob, that this shouldn't get glossed over at all, is that Andy Kotelnicki with Kansas did a number on this Illinois team. And I'm sure Brett Bielema and his entire staff are going to be reviewing that film like crazy. Like, obviously, they already as a team, last year broke that down. But man, they're going to have all the cut ups, and there's something to be said about having recent experience, against an offensive system and against a team. Now, granted, Penn State has different pieces, different quarterback, different, everything, right? Like the players are different, the personnel is different. But in terms of having experience against a system and against a specific coordinator, and I'm a lot of the guys on Illinois' defense, there were guys on Illinois' defense last year that are carried over that remember that game. So I'm interested to see the chess pieces and all the movements that could go on there between Kotelnicki and Illinois' defense, and how he ultimately decides to best scheme up Tyler Warren, the running backs, and Nick Singleton and Katron Allen, and those receivers that we talked about. Receivers that, by the way, I asked James about at the press conference today, and he said that he believes that it's the most improved unit on the team. And I think the only place to go with that group was up. I think was safe to say, but they have showed through 3 games that they've got some juice, and they'll have to carry it over and bring their they're not Penn State is not going to have to bring their own juice to this game, Bob. We know that the crowd is going to be crazy, and I'm looking forward to it. It's going to be that whiteout energy in the stands at Beaver Stadium, and for a big game too. I mean, big picture, number 19 team in the country, you beat them, and if you do so convincingly, that's a resume point. When you look at the CFP down the road, I know it's a ways away, but the committee and all that, like, people are watching, so just something to keep in mind as well.
Johnny, I want you to keep something in mind as well. I'm always watching you. I feel like we did our part today on a Monday. We brought the energy for the Penn State fan base, who is, if you're listening or watching, hopefully you're listening and not watching. If you're listening or you following it along, I feel like we did our part. We brought the energy. I'm going to call this our best podcast, at least in the last 7 or 8 days, and I'm gonna stand by that. And if anyone disagrees with me, I just think they're flat out wrong. But Johnny, it was good chatting with you. As I said, we're going to have at least one more podcast. Max Ralph was up at the press conference today. That's why he's not joining us today. But he'll be on. We'll have some more stuff to talk about. We'll get to our predictions. Who knows what else we're going to do this week? I have a feeling it's going to be a crazy week in a good way. And I'm looking forward to this game. Johnny, good chatting with you. We'll be back, Penn State fans, with some more podcasts. Check out all of our stuff on PennLive. Johnny's AP ballot, I believe, is out. I haven't had time to digest that yet. You've got some Heisman thoughts that are going to be going up on PennLive. Maybe Tyler Lawrence going to be mentioned somewhere in that story. I don't know. I'm not you. But Johnny, good chatting with you. We'll be back later this week.